Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host Steve Hall and I'm incredibly happy to have Jared Feather with me today, as I am sure all of you listeners are. If you know Mike Israetel, you sure know Jared Feather because he brings him up almost every other podcast. And he is part of Renaissance Periodization as well, the head physique coach. He is a natural pro bodybuilder and is very impressive physique-wise. Like, his physique is insane, which is why Mike brings him up all the time. And he's learned off the back of Mike, which means he knows a lot, but has also got his own experiences through his own training, through his own clients, and is very well educated. And in fact, still studying right now, aren't you, Jared?
Yep. Last semester of grad school, actually. So busy. That's why, we try to get me on here every now and again, and it just never freaking works out. I was like, oh shit, I forgot I had to go to the lab today and finish my, data collection or something. So
it's hard.
It finally worked out.
It's that
aside
life
from the deuce.
I say it's the life MRV. You've just got too much going on to try and fit in these podcasts.
I'm pretty close to that with relationships and training 2 times a day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a luxury, but at the same time, it's difficult to fit everything in. And something Jared is incredibly passionate about is natural bodybuilding and is maximizing hypertrophy. And this is definitely something we're going to be talking about during this chat. And how he applies kind of the principles of hypertrophy to himself, to his clients. So you guys can hopefully take away some practical application from that. Before we dive straight into that, I just wanted to kind of bring up to the listeners that we may not have announced it, but we may have announced it by now, that Jared and Mike will be coming over to London and probably Dublin for seminars. So I know you recently did one over in China. Is that right, Jared?
Yeah, we were in Hong Kong. It was a blast. We presented to a group of their best trainers, I guess. Hong Kong's most sought after trainer was actually there. So.
Oh, amazing!
That was pretty sweet.
Did you try any weird foods?
Man, honestly, I am entirely underwhelmed when people tell me, the food. Oh, but like American Chinese food, it's so different than regular Chinese food. And then I try it, and I'm like, yeah, it's like less bland. It's like more bland over there.
Yeah,
but it still tastes like American Chinese food. I'm like, Like Zion, my girlfriend, she was always like, no, San Antonio tacos, though. San Antonio tacos. It's like real Mexican food. Went there, tried them. I was like, you realize real Mexicans work at the restaurants. Like, it's not like they're just coming up with this shit and trying to make it more Missouri. So I'm always like, it tastes like food. It was delicious, though. I loved it. Dim sum, I never had dim sum. Very good. That was the one thing everyone was telling me to try. So.
Dim sum is good, and I
loved it.
It was the same. Me and Charlotte went to Mexico, and we actually enjoyed like the Americanized like Mexican places more. And it's just like, damn us, like we want to enjoy the authentic food, but Americans know how to do it.
Yeah, we just we had all that flavor and MSG and all the other good shit, all the fat.
Awesome. Well, at the moment, the first topic I want to touch on, and the first topic me and Jared have been back and forth having discussions about, it's something that if you have followed Mike Israetel, if you follow Renaissance Periodization, it's something that is one of the kind of main tools within their programming for hypertrophy within mesocycles, and that is relative intensity. So you might be tracking this yourself right now as a trainer, like through RPE, the relative perceived exertion scale, or through RIR, which is reps in reserve. And I think online it can be quite difficult sometimes when you see like the big jack guys who are maybe looking like they're going balls out all the time. Maybe they're using some sort of system that does keep kind of reps in reserve, but they don't call it that, or sometimes they are just going all out. And I think as a younger lifter or someone who's less experienced, it can be quite challenging to know how to approach your training. But if you just want to talk about kind of relative intensity and its role within hypertrophy, Jared, that would be really good.
Definitely. So relative intensity, also sort of known as like your proximity to failure. We can track that via RPE, RIR, which is reps and reserves. We mark that down as like the from failure concept in our training. But it's basically a big tool to help you manage fatigue throughout the mesocycle, and to still help you progress in such a way that each week you're able to overload your training it's, for some reason, it's been getting a lot of, talk about it lately as like it's not actually training hard. Some of the younger guys that are coming up are like, you just gotta, take the experience from all these jacked guys and use the anecdotal side of things and just train your ass off. And like, cool, that's good and well, but the whole thing about that is nobody ever said don't train hard. There's a reason that we go through the volume landmarks and each week we're hitting our maximum adaptive volume. It's maximum and it's adaptive. And we're hitting that within the RIR system, the RPE system. To say the week one of your maximum adaptive volume and a like 4 or 3 RIR, which is being shown to be basically the closest you want to be to not failing. So anything 5 and above from your absolute failure would be less than optimal for hypertrophic outcomes. To say that training with your maximum adaptive volume at a 4 RIR isn't hard it sort of doesn't make much sense. I think that they're missing or not connecting two concepts. This was initially sort of the other way around. We were trying to keep people from fatiguing themselves too much, chasing reps, maybe stopping too shy, because people would program their mesocycles or just program their training, and they would say, okay, 3 by 12 today. I'm going to pick a weight, I'm going to do 3 by 12, or I'm going to increase weight and do 3 by 12. They'd get to 12, they'd stop, or they would be chasing reps. They'd be chasing that 12. So if we say mesocycle 1, we want you in a certain rep range with a certain proximity to failure, then you're able to stop that yourself, kind of. Mm-hmm. So if I say I want you to 6 to 10 reps, you give me your best 10 RM, I program a certain percentage based off of that, and it should land you within 6 to 10 reps at that RIR, at that RPE. So whether that's a 7 RPE or a 3 RIR, 3 reps in reserve, 3 reps left in the tank before you're reaching that absolute failure. It was to help you realize sort of each set isn't going to be the exact same in reps achieved. It might be something more like 10, 10, 9 within that 6 to 10 rep range with 3 left in the tank. That's to say, if you got 10 on the set, you could have got 13 total reps and you would have been a complete failure. If you do that for, let's say, body part per week, just an example, let's say quads. If 12 is like someone's minimum effective volume and they're training at like 13 or 14 sets that week for the adaptive outcome, 14 total quad sets at a 3 RIR, last time I checked, that's pretty fucking hard. We were trying to get people to train harder, right? And RPE is trying to get people to train harder and not stop so short. This got turned around somehow with all these young kids coming up, like young guys don't need to pay attention to the RIR, young guys just need to train to failure, which is actually funny because as Mike's talked about on multiple podcasts, the more of a beginner you are, the less you can do and still make gains. So 1 set a week is enough for someone who's never touched a weight for them to grow. That's not saying stop at 1 set a week. It's just saying that's their minimum effective volume. That's how it works. So to say these young kids need to push to failure more often and not pay attention to the RIR, it doesn't make sense. Huge proponents of this, 3DMJ, myself, the hypertrophy god himself, Brad Schoenfeld, these people have produced data that shows 4 and below, great for hypertrophic outcomes within the certain intensity threshold, 60% and above. 5 and below, or 5 and more, probably not a good idea. So to go against them just because you think all these anecdotes or whatever are more useful, it doesn't make much sense, because the whole entire point of science is to make what we already know better. Mm-hmm. Using anecdotes, especially if you're a coach, this is wide-eyed because they know who I'm talking about, if you're a coach claiming to be science-based, you should probably try to be science-based and not throw out all the evidence. It's really frustrating to see someone who has a really big impact on younger bodybuilders in this natural bodybuilding community, to see them have a negative impact in my eyes, and just tell them, here's a quote, take everything Mike Israetel says with a pinch of pink Himalayan sea salt. To say shit like that and not realize you're literally talking about an expert in the field, it'd be like me saying Brad Schoenfeld doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, who the hell am I to say that? I don't even have my master's yet. It's just very, very childish, and it's very sad to see because they have such a big impact on a lot of guys in the natural bodybuilding community. What they can do is help you to understand you do need to train harder. You do need to try and figure out that sort of reps and reserve system, the RPE, the proximity to failure. And you do need to realize what that feels like. So if, going to failure once or twice per mesocycle, or even just going to failure on the smaller muscle groups, if that gets you the feeling of what failure feels like, then you kind of can work backwards and realize, okay, I'm probably a 3 RR right now. When there's a bit of a technique slowdown / breakdown, hopefully not breakdown, but sort of that, you got that real consistent, what do they call that, repetition cadence.
Oh, yeah.
You got a real consistent cadence in your reps, and then it slows down, probably a decent indicator that you're starting to get more in that 4 RIR, maybe closer to 3 RIR. And if you're in your earlier weeks of the mesocycle and you want to leave room for overload and not get super systemically fatigued because you're chasing reps or chasing failure all the fucking time, that's a good place to stop. And still maximally adapt for the week. That's the whole fucking point. They take what these people are doing that are misapplying it. They're taking one concept, so RIR, and they're completely bashing it without tying in the rest of the principles. And Eric Helms made a really good post about this recently about principles over, what was the direct quote? I wish I could directly quote it.
Principles.
You still there, Steve?
Yeah, I'm still here. I was trying to think of the quote that you were referring to.
No, you can pause on the screen for a little bit. So I didn't know you.
I'm still here. So yeah, he was talking about there's principles and then there's many methods to those principles, I think was the sort of quote. I can't exactly remember it, but there's many ways to go about things, but you still need to abide by certain principles. Yeah,
so basically he's talking about if you see a program and the program has a name, don't just ask someone, what do you think about GVT? What do you think about DUP? What do you think about this? Take the principles that we know that have been laid out for us through sports science, through years of research. Like when people say it's the RP way, I don't like the way RP does shit. We're not doing shit in RP way. We're doing shit based on science, based on these principles that we didn't come up with this shit. I don't think people realize that. Like we're utilizing the things that have already been laid out for us that we've been learning through, like how I learned through undergrad, how I'm learning through masters, how the rest of the PhDs at Renaissance, the rest of the PhDs and coaches at 3DMJ, the things we learned in our classes, the things that podcasts can't teach you, wink, wink, the things that can't teach you, the physiology behind it, that's what we're using to make programs. And that's what we're using to look at programs. That's how it works. You don't just say, how's GVT? Well, how many years you've been training? Who are you talking about? Do you need that much volume? What's your MRV? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's, just got to start looking at things that way. Man, I don't even know where I was. What led me to that freaking rant right there?
It was a very good rant, to be honest. You brought up loads of really interesting points and quite a few I want to actually touch on. And
ask.
I mean, for sure, I think it's, just because obviously we have Mike on the show all the time. I respect Mike massively. And he's such a humble and very nice guy. Like, to say such statements about his education, his background, and the stuff he puts out, it's not really, he's not really trying to go out of his way to harm anyone. He is putting out what he thinks is the best information. And
that's all we're doing.
Yeah, it's difficult. And then again, like you touched on, it's not really the RP way. I've definitely heard these sort of statements before about like Eric Helms does it like this. And yeah, I mean, it is, those methods might be different, but the overall principles, when you really understand them, like you've read Scientific Principles of Strength Training, you understand that, the RP Diet Book, the Muscle and Strength Pyramids, once you've got those kind of background principles, yes, there's many methods, but remember the principles still kind of are there and they make sense. But the thing I wanted to really touch on is you basically made a good case for starting off with the minimum we need to produce the result we want, and then being able to, because we know progressive overload is required, and then overloading from there. I think when you are, and for me, for sure, when I was younger and I got first into the gym, and I think loads of people are going to be able to relate to this, I just went in and did basically as much as I could. And I basically followed linear progression until I've just either my form completely broke down, I got injured, or I started actually regressing. I can remember regressing. So did you want to kind of touch?
Yeah, let me stop you there. That's the big thing. It's the whole Nike attitude is rudimentary. It's pretty well established. You got to work hard. So just to repeat, you got to work hard to make yourself seem like a better coach. I don't understand how people fall for this shit. I don't get it. Yeah, we get it. Work hard. Nike, just do it. I understand that. I learned that when I was in fucking preschool. So the big thing that you mentioned that I want to touch on is the injury thing. Like Mike, I like this quote. If you don't deload, your body's going to fucking deload for you, right? So to just push a shitload of volume on your clients, on yourself, tell them work hard, actually go to complete muscular failure, even with some technique breakdown, even through really shitty ranges of motion, you're literally setting them up, if you can get them jacked enough, for a really bad acute injury. So there's acute and chronic injuries. Both of those can be, you can do both of those to yourself basically by that mind state of I just got to work hard all the time, go to failure all the time. It's going to lead to overuse, chronic injuries, and it's going to lead to acute injuries sooner rather than later. How many guys have you met bouncing the fucking deadlift off the ground, and the next week you see them and they're like, I'm not deadlifting this week, something in my back, they're like the SI thing back there.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, I could have told you that, You're going to failure on deadlifts, bouncing it off the ground. You're not even actually controlling the deadlift. So that's the thing that you touched on that really hopefully is an eye-opener for a lot of these kids. Like, yeah, you got to work hard, but your coach, if your coach is a good coach and they understand RPE and RIR, which every powerlifter in the world that is elite uses RPE, which is RIR. Mm-hmm. To disregard that completely is just absurd. They have some of the most muscle mass in the world. Tell me Ray Williams doesn't have equal muscle mass to an IFBB pro. You know what I'm saying? He does. He absolutely fucking does. Maybe more for a lot of them. Like the 212s, they don't have that much. So to say this whole system is garbage is just like, I don't understand. You're training your clients, you're throwing all the volume at them, you're setting them up for these injuries, and it's not a good idea. I think stepping back, reevaluating what you're doing, looking at the principles, applying them to your training, and then also applying the concepts that come along with those principles, like this RPE, like the RAR, deloading, fatigue management, substrate repletion.
Yeah, I think something that a lot of people who struggle with the reps in reserve, the RPE scale, and something that's actually been studied is the fact that people who are less experienced in the gym are less good at being able to actually make sure that they're doing it successfully. And we only really, it's kind of a skill to be able to really understand where you are. How do you go about kind of engaging that with your clients, helping them get an understanding of their reps in reserve? Do you have any systems or ways you've helped them understand how they're doing it, whether it's like filming their form or actually going to failure now and then to try and get a gauge for that?
Filming is pretty decent, especially if they're like, basically a client will send me their stats. They'll tell me they've been training for a year, 6 months. Then they'll send me their 10 RMs. Okay. If you see pictures of your clients and then you see their 10 RMs and their 10 RMs don't look like they match the pictures of the client, it's pretty simple. You say, hey, how about you send me a video of your squats the first week? And I'll give them the intensities based off of what they said. And then once they send me the videos, I'll be like, how about you try this? You try this range of motion. You try pointing the toes out a little bit. You try controlling the eccentric a little better, like in a squat. And then they're like, yeah, man, I got 2 reps. Yeah, I know. That's why I said that. So the way we can kind of, as a coach, get them to that RIR themselves is by programming a certain percentage. I like to program 80 to 82% of their 10 RM, and then say you need to be within the 6 to 12 rep range, right? So 80 to 82% of your 10 RM is a pretty damn good intensity. It's probably roughly 65% of your 1 RM or something like that. Mm-hmm. So to go in and say you need to be in a 6 to 12 rep range, that like the first mesocycle or something, typically it looks something like, they'll go for the heavy end of the range, they'll get 12. They'll realize that they're getting a lot of metabolite accumulation. They'll realize they're getting a lot of within session fatigue. They'll get like 10, then they'll get like 9. And they sort of intuitively do this because, you're telling them, week 1, I would like you to be within the 4 reps in reserve. Week 2, 3, week 3, 2, etc. Hey, you still with me, Steve?
Yeah, still.
Sorry, your picture keeps freezing over here. It's scaring the shit out of me.
I'm just deadly still.
Yeah, I'm in like res hall Wi-Fi. That's why I look like I'm in a freaking jail cell. But so with especially beginner clients, I send a little bit more lengthy explanation in that initial email of how it works. And a lot of times they'll overdo it.
Yeah.
And you can kind of track that with their performance and try to help them understand as the mesocycle goes on. It's going to be trial and error with beginner clients. Obviously, that's a hard system. When you get like 2 and 1 RIR, it's pretty easy to understand. Oh, I got like 2 or 1 left. 4 and 3 RIR is like a little harder to judge. But once they send me their technique videos or they send me sort of their questions, which this is usually a question I get from them, you just dive into a little bit more of an explanation of how that works. Like I told you earlier, you start to feel a little bit of cadence slow down. That's probably a good week 1. So they'll be like, yeah, man, I did, 10 reps. I could have probably done a few more though, but my cadence slowed down, so I did stop. And then the next week, I'm like, perfect. This is what I want you to do. The whole point of us adding the weight to the bar as well is to get you closer to the proximity to failure for the week.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of repeat that in a different way. If I give you 3 RIR, 3 reps in reserve the first week, and 2 reps in reserve the second week, what you're doing is matching the reps from this week. And if I add 5 to 10 pounds to the bar or a certain percentage to the bar for that next week, it basically just auto-regulates itself and you're hitting that same rep range, the same reps on those sets with the heavier weight at the new RIR. So if you got 10.99 at 3 RIR with 100 pounds, you should be getting 10.99 with 105 pounds at 2 RIR the next week. So that's sort of a way that I can program it to make sure they're hitting the correct RIR per week. Mm-hmm. You'll have times when you program a weight, and this just happens anyways for any coach. You'll program a weight and they have like 15 reps listed. I got 15, it was way too light. And it's like, okay, you just go and you fix it. You base it off the performance. You go up, 20 pounds instead of 10 pounds the next week or something, mm-hmm. and it fixes itself. You say, hey, don't worry about getting 15, knock it down, stay within the rep range that we want, stick with the RR that I want. But that's the big thing, like you asked, and I sort of guess in a roundabout way, I just went the long way around. It's that programming the intensity jumps per week to make sure they're meeting the next RIR.
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And I guess the actual great thing with the reps and reserve system is even if, because you're not going to have the same things happening every single week. One week you don't get enough sleep for a session. Totally. So, your reps might even come down. You might not meet.
And they can.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the great thing with the reps and reserve. Whereas, like you said initially, when you're programming, like you must hit these reps with these sets with this load, and you're progressively increasing load, and you end up chasing that. And that's when the problems come in with the form breakdown and all of those scenarios coming along, which is definitely something you want to avoid.
Yeah, and even like, so you said some weeks are different. Yeah, so I'll have clients who are 3 reps in reserve that second week or something, and then the next week is super stressful, and they're not going to match the reps. The cool part about that is that volume over the week, because of sets, goes up. So if the volume overall is increasing, because we're working from this, and this is what I'm talking about combining all these concepts together. Yeah. This is how it works. Since the volume overall is going up over the week from the sets, we're working from MEV to MRV, so the sets are going up. The intensity is going up. The proximity to failure is going up. All these things lead to overload. If one thing fucks up, 2 other things are working in your favor. Not a huge deal. Mm-hmm. So if you can't match the reps and your 2 RAR is now 8 instead of 10 on your first set because of the intensity jump, 1, I'll make a better intensity jump next time for you. And if we couldn't avoid it, then 2, you have the sets going up even later on in the week for your other sessions. So if it was quads that was going bad, quads are still going up in the other session. If it was chest going bad, chest is still going up in the other session. So that's going up, and the intensity is going to go up.
Mm-hmm. No, I like the system, and it's definitely something that sounds very familiar with me and the stuff I use the stuff we use with our clients here. And it's because the great thing about it is it's so dynamic, and you're continually learning kind of how you're responding to your training, how everything's going. And that's what I really enjoy about it. I had a point in my head that I've completely forgotten because, can you speak, Jared? I don't know if I can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I can still hear you. Good. So, yeah, it's a completely dynamic system. So you're continually learning. So I was going to say with my clients, when we do use kind of those 3 to 4 reps in reserve, the majority of them overshoot. And that means then they end up not being able to progress as well through the weeks. We may even end up deloading early. And then you learn from that. Whereas other people, they might be going a bit kind of on the softer side. They might not push hard enough. But in that final week, or when you are with that 1 rep in reserve, eventually, you learn there. Like if your reps are suddenly jumping up with increased load, the other weeks you're going to ease yourself. And essentially, it's for everyone I've worked with, it's basically a month. And then they've learned the system and they've learned how to use relative intensity. And then that sets them up for years of progressive training where they can actually go and overload and recover and manage fatigue and get the better results.
Totally. So what these train harder gurus I think are aiming at is the population that is undershooting. But like I find that with my advanced clients, they're not undershooting. They're overshooting because they want to train fucking hard. They love going to the gym. The beginner clients who are sort of like, yeah, okay, I get it, and then they undershoot. That's not a big deal, man. And this is what I'm talking about with actually like, this is the things that the education teaches you in conceptualizing concepts in class, having a professor to ask things. It's like overload's a 2-part definition. It's within a maximum threshold and harder than recent previous stimuli. Are they meeting the first fucking point or the second point of that fucking definition? Yes, they undershot a little bit. Who fucking cares? It's harder than not doing anything at all. That's what a beginner does, is nothing at all. So if they met the second part of the overload definition, are they not going to fucking see any growth whatsoever just because they accidentally undershot on a training session or 2? No, and they're going to be fucking safer. So why are people bitching about that? It doesn't make sense. They understand that it has to get harder. That's what overload is. It has to get fucking harder. And the clients understand that because as a coach, we say that. I would just say, hey man, it's okay that you undershot this week. Next week's going to get a little bit harder and you're going to have to understand that. Mm-hmm. That's it. You don't have to go on, you don't have to create, little DM groups and just talk shit on all these beginners that are doing that. You don't have to like publicly just make millions of rants about how nobody trains as hard as you, bro, and you're the hardest fucking trainer of all time. It's like they're learning. We all learn too. Maybe you learn by just demolishing yourself like me and Steve did, getting those little injuries along the way. And maybe you learn by undershooting a little bit and having your coach say, hey man, it's okay that you undershot. And for any beginner listening, it's okay that you undershot, but it has to get harder. And that's the point they're trying to make that it's a moot point. Just make the point. Training has to get harder. You can't just undershoot all the time, and the more advanced you get, the harder it's going to get. As a beginner, within the first couple years of training, do you need to take training to failure all the fucking time? No. In later weeks of the mesocycle, like if you can run 6-week mesocycles or something like that since you're a beginner, and like weeks 5 and 6, should training be pretty goddamn hard? Hell yeah, it should be. So, I mean, that's a pretty moot point to make. We understand that.
And it's actually interesting to me because for sure the first kind of weeks of mesocycles sometimes feel like I'm not training that hard. Maybe I want to push harder. But by the end of my mesocycles, like that final week, every single time I get there, I'm like, this is the hardest I've ever trained. And it's much harder than I ever could have if I was training kind of very kind of somewhat hard all the time.
Totally. And that's the funny thing. I have a couple IFBB clients now, Men's Physique one right now. He same thing, man. He just wanted to train fucking hard. And he's a natural guy too. He's just a Men's Physique competitor. He just wants to train hard because that's what all the guys around him are doing, like hard. He said when he reached week 4 of the mesocycle, it was the hardest training he's ever done in his life. It's like they think that this sort of progression leads people to just be soft. And it's like, man, if you think you train hard, go through a well thought out, periodized approach where at the end of the mesocycle, you're trying to functionally overreach, you'll understand what hard training is. It gets very hard as an intermediate to advanced lifter. As a beginner lifter, can it be less hard? Absolutely. Does it have to be? No. You can still train hard if you just love to train. But yeah, so he just midway through the week, he was like, dude, I kind of have like a runny nose. I feel like garbage. Fatigue is catching up for sure. I'm like, yeah, man, that's what happens. So he finishes the mesocycle and then he's deloading. He's like, I've never wanted to deload in my life. So it gets hard. It's
completely true. And that's exactly from, all the literature I'd read before I even came across Mike's work. And you think about kind of the Hensile principle where you have to accumulate and then you dissipate that stress via the deload, but you need to, and adaptive systems adapt harder and harder and harder. And you have to push them to a point where you can make new adaptations. And for the advanced lifter, you have to train at that point. That's very, very difficult sometimes to see that net result. But as a beginner, you don't, like you said. So it's very interesting. And it just, for me, the whole system makes good sense. And we've kind of touched on deloads and you've touched on them a little bit. I thought it would be useful for the listeners. We get tons of questions on deloads. So it'd be really helpful, I think, for you to kind of explain how you use them with your clients and how you implement those.
Yeah, totally. So deloads are basically always planned for me and my clients. The more advanced someone is, it seems like the mesocycle sort of needs to decrease in length just because of the fatigue that they can induce with the intensities that they're using. Their threshold between MEV and MRV kind of decreases a little bit, things of that nature. So deloads will be, sooner for them, later for beginners, but they're planned. And that's because if you try to sort of auto-regulate your deloads, and this is another thing like the hard training crowd is like trying to promote, auto-regulation of deloads, or whatever you want to call it, it's not actually what you would call that, but taking them when you feel like it and when your performance goes down, that's okay. But taking planned deloads takes care of like damage to microstructures and tendons that you can't exactly feel. I think Mike's told you the story about the bodybuilder who blew his quad off the bone posing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He didn't take the time to take the deloads, take the active rest periods, manage those microstructure tears, the tendon tears, the joint pain and things of that nature. Like I said, performance is an okay indicator. If you went 5 weeks, or let's say 6 weeks, like you're an intermediate lifter, you went 6 weeks of hard training. At the end, you were reaching 1 RIR, and you think, I feel decent. Or midway through your deload, you're like, I feel decent. I can just stop deloading because I feel decent. Performance is okay, but just think about those microstructures. Think about the tendons and just realize they need healing too. where you might not feel it, it doesn't matter. They still got to heal. Like a paper cut. Would you just keep cutting the fucking paper cut when it doesn't sting anymore? No, you'd let the fucking paper cut heal. So.
No, I think I was going to say, I think Mike used, I think this is the analogy he used, where it's kind of like you're driving along, you have a full gas tank, but you can't see how much gas you've got. So it's like you're going along and you've been driving a certain number of miles. You're like, I'm still driving. I could keep going, but I might end up stalling and then like being absolutely lost. Or maybe I'll just drop in and get some gas so I know I'm full so I can keep going.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, it just rings true so well, because every single time a deload comes around, I might be like, I don't really want to take it. But every time I do it and then come out of it, once it's like one of those things, you don't know it until you try it. Yeah,
so definitely. And that's one of the biggest parts about it. So I just wanted to touch on that. But deloading in general is important. It's an important concept. And anybody who is like claiming science or evidence-based, or just a coach in general that is trying to tell you that it's not important, I don't think they actually understand what it's trying to do. But it's a two-part thing, right? Deloading isn't just getting rid of fatigue. Deload is also sort of repleting our substrates. And there's a cool little fact about muscle glycogen and total body glycogen stores, and that's that the closer we reach a certain percentage of our total body glycogen stores, the more catabolic regulators go up, fatigue goes up, and it sort of just creates this relationship where fatigue rises exponentially while glycogen and everything performance fall off exponentially in the other way. If you're not taking the full deload and not repleting substrates from the really hard training, especially the guys that are training super fucking hard, if they're going to deload, then they need the full deload, because their total body glycogen stores are probably even lower. And the second you start your mesocycle again without repleting your substrates, you're giving yourself even less time to train hard, because you're going to deplete substrates more quickly, which means more fatigue more quickly, which means more catabolic regulators, AMPK, more quickly. So to say never deload just doesn't make much sense to me. It's a two-part thing. We're healing those structures, healing the microstructures, healing the muscle tears, getting rid of fatigue, and we're repleting the substrates.
And is that in a scenario of cutting or massing and cutting?
Both. Yeah, 100% both. So even when you're massing, you're still depleting total body glycogen stores. Yeah, you can replete a little better maybe, since you're having more carbs, more meals, you're hypercaloric, but you can't escape. What does Mike say about anabolic resistance? It's just everywhere. You just can't escape it, right? So you can't escape the fact that it's going to happen.
No, I think I've definitely seen it with myself in the past when I maybe didn't take any lower volume phases, I didn't take any deloads, and it just seemed like I was literally battling fatigue and just grinding through sessions where I could, rather than doing like like taking a diet break just refuels you for like more easier dieting in future. Like people do these, they end up yo-yo dieting, rather than having these like progressive steps towards getting leaner and leaner. No, I think that was a fantastic discussion. I don't know if you want to touch on anything else on deloads. We can move on to like the next. I know you want to talk on this next topic, so I want to make sure we cover it.
Yeah, just realize that if you don't deload, that's when you set yourself up for those acute traumatic injuries down the road. I think the work hard crowd, I'm just gonna seriously go back to this a lot, because it's super frustrating to have guys who claim science-based just repeat shit in a more intellectual manner that IFBB pros that don't know anything have been saying forever. Like, fucking work hard. That's what they're saying. They're trying to portray it as this like intellectual debate when it's really not at all. You're just saying the same shit we've already heard. So understand that if you do not deload, your coach doesn't have you deload frequently, they're not planned, it can lead to those sort of acute traumatic injuries. I'm not trying to like scare people from training hard because you still need to train hard. Like I said, put all the pieces together. I've obviously said you need to train hard. I've obviously said training needs to get harder and you need to functionally overreach toward the end if you're intermediate to advanced. But you also need to deload. So I'm not saying don't ever fucking train hard and always deload. I'm saying plan your deloads, train as hard as you need to through the volume landmarks up until you functionally overreach, fucking blast yourself, and then make sure you take care of that shit. You're just taking care of it. Mm-hmm. So don't have an acute traumatic injury, like the work hard crowd says, these guys that are at the top, what is one thing they all have in common? They went through some shit. They all got some fucking battle wounds, yada, yada. I'm like, yeah, that's fucking cool, but they could have avoided it, and they could have progressed a little better. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they fucking worked hard, but I guarantee you, if you took someone, put them through a well-periodized approach, took them through some volume landmarks, took them through and got them to understand what it means to train and adapt and maximally adapt week to week to week, they would have made even more gains. Mm-hmm. So to say just because they worked hard, that's why they made the most gains, it's not true. So just make sure your coach is planning deloads for you, make sure they're taking a really well-periodized approach, and just let it all fall into place.
Just to finish on this, just because I have a great analogy for it, and I think it's been used by multiple people before, but it's like, I've definitely had friends where they're like, oh, it doesn't matter if I get burnt in the sun, because eventually it turns into a nice tan, like it's fine, and then it peels off, and they could give themselves some serious problems in future with that. Whereas the person who kind of just accumulates a little bit of sunlight, then they get a bit more, they're going to have a much healthier situation going on. They're going to be more tanned for longer. It's kind of that accumulation of things, not an acute dose that you want. And this is every biological system, like Broderick would definitely say.
Yep.
Awesome. So let's...
and that's another thing. They wouldn't... That's a fine thing to say, like, yeah, sure, it's going to turn to a tan. But they wouldn't just fucking stay out in the sun. Like, if you had a alternate dimension where 24 hours a day it was daylight, it was 90 degrees, they wouldn't fucking sit in the sun for 24 hours a day, because the burn would just get worse and worse and worse, turn into traumatic injury, and then you're in the fucking hospital.
No, exactly. No, it's, we're getting on to, I think I'm really glad that we had that discussion. I think you've kind of explained it incredibly well, Jared. So I hope a lot of the listeners take that on board, a lot of coaches take that on board, because I think that was some seriously helpful information that was put to them. The next question I have for you, and I know you want to rant on this one, so I'm excited for your answer, is I think a lot of people, when they're in diets or especially in contest prep, they're kind of chasing almost tension, and they're really, really like, I have to maintain strength, sometimes for the sake of volume, and they're very worried, and they kind of think if they're getting weaker, then that's definitely a sign of muscle loss. They have to take a refeed or a diet break. And I'd just love to hear about your thoughts on kind of strength losses whilst dieting. Does that mean you're losing muscle if you see that kind of performance decrement?
Yeah, totally. So basically, man, I wish I could remember the quote. I'm not even going to try it. But there are some things going on when we're dieting, like the depletion of substrates. Fatigue is catching up to us, especially in the later phases of dieting. The later phases of dieting, when we're in show prep and we're hitting a whole bunch of volume, and our calories are like 2,000 calories a day, and we're doing, fucking 6 times a week cardio or whatever it may be. Anabolic resistance is out the ass. Our leverages are off. All these things, right? What that is a calculated trade-off. That's all that it is, okay? It's the same thing in powerlifting. When powerlifters go through hypertrophy phases, or powerlifters try to get down a weight class, they take a calculated trade-off in their 1 rep max for the time being. That doesn't mean they can't do it. It means they're not primed for it. They're not ready for it. If you're not willing to take the calculated trade-off, like these powerlifters that are trying to either get down a weight class or put on muscle before they can go back and make themselves strong again, you just have to be willing to take that trade-off. It's not a loss in your strength. So putting heavy 5s, heavy 4s, heavy 3s on the bar during super hypercaloric periods to maintain your strength is a fucking terrible idea when you take into account the fatigue that comes along with the intensities that you're using. So the intensity, the weight on the bar relative to how strong you are, the closer you reach your 100%, so your 1 rep max, the more fatiguing it is. Trying to do the most fatiguing shit, hypocaloric, when you could just put a little more volume in there and just realize that you're not losing strength, you have a calculated trade-off, it's probably going to save you some, for sure, injuries, because I don't know how many people I know there was a real popular guy who was supposed to compete last year that ended up fucking both his elbows up or something like that because he was doing some crazy shit on deadlifts. But just understand, glycogen's, you have less glycogen, you weigh less, so your leverages are off. There's a lot of conversion type things going on with inside the muscle fiber, not necessarily direct conversions to different types, but fibers that are faster and bigger motor units basically taking on slower twitch characteristics. That's going to lead to less force production. Okay, it's going to lead to less of a 1 rep max strength. You're not losing it. Okay, the catabolic regulators in your body from the hypocaloric dieting, from the high volumes, from the cardio, it's just so high that the ability of you to go ahead and express that strength is just down. It's just down. It's not gone. You still have the muscle tissue, especially if you're prepping right, you're prepping with a really good coach, and they've maintained your muscle tissue. Tell me how you get weaker. You didn't lose muscle, okay? You just lost some of the things that go with force production. So understanding that you need to take these calculated trade-offs and not chase what you did before is something that especially natural bodybuilders just need to understand. Like the guys on drugs, you know, maybe they can get away with more dumb shit, like Ronnie Coleman deadlifting 800 pounds or whatever the fuck it was for 3 reps like 2 weeks before the Olympia. So yeah, no fucking shit. He upped his dose to 2 grams per week. Do whatever the fuck he wants. But you can also get hurt doing that shit. So the natural guys need to understand maintaining your strength just isn't going to happen. Maintaining the ability to show your strength is what I mean. It's just not going to happen, okay? It's in no way optimal to try and do that, especially when you start thinking about fatigue and potential injury risk. If you ask me, when I'm deep into a diet and I'm fucking glycogen depleted, the best time of the day for me is getting a pump in the gym and not looking like a flat piece of fucking shit. How do you get a pump in the gym? You do high volumes. How do you look better? It's the high volumes. It's not chasing the strength. So this could be good news for you because that just means you can actually now do more volume with less fatigue relative to the intensity used in the volume match. So if you just try to do a little less strength training and a little more volume training in those later phases, accept the calculated trade-off, you're probably going to be doing yourself a big service, especially when we start talking about the injury risk. So
yeah, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people then cut their volume to try and maintain that intensity. And then they make the argument that anyone who says different, like dropping intensity and raising volumes, is making an argument for the high pumpy, like the old, like people think of like the 20 plus repetitions, really light weights and doing toning work, which is not what you're saying, right?
Yeah, not at all, because last time I checked, 6 to 8 reps is pretty fucking heavy. Like, it's pretty well shown that above a certain threshold, we're, stimulating hypertrophy. It's pretty well shown that if you're training with these RIRs, RPEs, it's stimulating hypertrophy. So if you're hitting that 6 to 8 rep range on your heavy compounds, it's probably a little safer at 70%, 75% than it would be to hit sets of 3 at 85%, 90%. It's just safer, but it's still signaling hypertrophy. It's still helping you maintain your lean tissue. I don't understand how that's a debate, honestly, that this isn't going to help us maintain our lean tissue in the long run and that you have to just train heavy and that's the anabolic trigger. Like that, most of that literature is on like maintenance level calorie, maintenance body weight. Like they didn't really change that too much. and phases for athletes, where they did like, sets of 3 to 5. So it's just like,
and we have good literature as well, like that's commenting how this is useful for people who are maybe injured, so they can use lighter loads and still get hypertrophy. People who are older, so they can't use such high intensities, they can still see great growth. I think
totally.
Eric Helms may have even said he had one of the 3DMJ coaches took someone to stage with just occlusion training or something on their legs.
Yeah, because they were injured.
Yeah,
totally. And so, I mean, is that an anecdotal experience? Sure. But we can sort of conceptualize multiple concepts to understand that volume's the number one contributor to hypertrophy, which means during a diet, if you're trying to promote anabolism, you're trying to trigger mTOR during training, it's going to be fine. Volume is fine within that maximum threshold or minimum threshold.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we've had an amazing discussion, and I want to say a massive thank you for Jared for making the time to do this. And if people are like, they enjoyed this, maybe you can comment and like say how much you love Jared, and maybe I'll be able to, that would encourage him to come back on the show, or if you do have any other questions or concerns. But also, remember that we're going to be having those RP seminars in the UK, and Jared's going to be here with Mike, and we'll be going to going over hypertrophy in some crazy depth like never before, and also probably doing some private gym sessions as well. So that's going to be incredibly exciting. I'm excited to meet Jared for the first time, and also be with Mike again and get dwarfed by both of you.
I lost you for a second.
I was just, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I was just saying how I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and getting dwarfed by both yourself and Mike.
I don't think you'll be dwarfed. How tall are you? You're like 5'11", right?
I'm 5'10". I think you're the same. But
yeah, you're probably bigger than me, man. Don't worry.
40 pounds heavier though, Jared.
Yeah, I'm soft from the sides, man. Don't worry.
So if people want to kind of learn more about you, learn more from you, and they're not coming to those seminars, where should they reach out? I know you're active on Instagram.
Yeah, totally. Instagram, I try it. Honestly, I try to like answer, because I don't think many people do this. I try to answer every comment, every DM that I get, and as in depth as I can. While in grad school, that's taken, the back burner, obviously, but I still try to do it. My email's in my profile, and I love really structured emails with really good questions, so I can kind of respond back to you. And I mean, we both learn that way. It's really cool, and I don't mind it. So follow me on Instagram. It's just Jared_Feather. Facebook, I'll post shit on there every now and again. Mike sort of is the leader on Facebook there. But I post shit on there. It's just my name. And that's all social media I have. But you can email me too. I really don't give a shit. I just like to talk, man. Fucking call me, whatever. And I'll make sure those are linked below, and also your YouTube channel, because you did a great vlog of your contest prep, which is really cool. And it talked about a lot of these principles and showed in your training. Yeah, and what we didn't talk about today is how I take my clients and myself through these volume landmarks, and how I progress from mesocycle to mesocycle, sort of how we continue to overload, especially during prep. So I did a whole series on that. And just so everyone knows, I got a DEXA scan before and after prep, and I lost no muscle tissue. It was really cool. So I would say it's pretty good for maintaining really muscle tissue, taking people through the volume landmarks and doing it correctly and always overloading mesocycle to mesocycle. But I talk about it on there. It's also just my name, I think, if you just put Jared Feather in. The first video that'll pop up will be someone muscle worshiping me. The second video will be it's not even a joke either. It's like a whole collage of like my Instagram clips.
Oh no,
super crazy.
Yeah, that's quite weird.
But the second thing that'll pop up will be my page, hopefully.
Well, I'll make sure that's linked below as well if you don't search it. But now you're going to get a load of people watching that muscle worshipping video.
Yeah, sweet.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you once again to Jared, and we will catch you soon.